My Bible is open to Judges chapter 18 as we continue our study through this book. Hope that you will open up your Bibles to that text so that we can get into our God's Word together. It's good to see everyone out again this evening. It's always such a good thing when we can be together and open up our God's Word and to worship Him together. It's always so wonderful. So glad we get to do this with one another this evening. As I said, we are continuing in our study of the Judges to be able to take this writing and make application to our lives. We are continuing through the story of Micah. Last week we saw all of the mistakes that he made in thinking of giving himself in devotion to God, and he makes these household gods that are not gods. We'll actually see that point further this evening, but we see his making his son a priest, which his son was unqualified to be, and then we see his making one who is a Levite a priest, but we also made the point about his being unqualified to be such. We will actually talk a little bit more about that this evening as well, since that information did come out of the chapter that we are going through this evening. But coming to the overall concept here, we're going to be talking about some things that do get into some scholarly discussion. So I do want to say from the forefront here, as we look at this chapter overall, we're going to be reaching a singular conclusion, regardless of what way some information is going to be presented later in the chapter, that we're going to see the concept of power prevailing inside of this chapter. That's a central theme that we want to pull out of it and recognize what power is to prevail and what power does prevail in this situation, so that we can take that and make application to our lives. And so with that, let's go ahead and look at these first 6 verses as we are coming to thinking about what the tribe of Dan is doing here. In Judges 18 and verse 1, in those days there was no king in Israel, and in those days the tribe of the people of Dan was seeking for itself an inheritance to dwell in. For until then no inheritance among the tribes of Israel had fallen to them. So the people of Dan sent 5 able men from the whole number of their tribe, from Zorah and from Eshtaol, to spy out the land and to explore it. And they said to them, "Go and explore the land." And they came to the hill country of Ephraim, to the house of Micah, and lodged there. When they were by the house of Micah, they recognized the voice of the young Levite, and they turned aside and said to him, "Who brought you here? What are you doing in this place? What is your business here?" And he said to them, "This is how Micah dealt with me. He has hired me, and I have become his priest." And they said to him, "Inquire of God, please, that we may know whether the journey on which we are setting out will succeed." And the priest said to them, "Go in peace. The journey on which you go is under the eye of the Lord." So as we step into this chapter, we open up once more with this phrase that there was no king in Israel. Now, this is intended to remind us of chapter 17 in verse 6. The secondary phrase is not included with it, but as he calls to mind the first part of the phrase, he's bringing to mind the second part of the phrase back where we read, "In those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes." And so, after talking a little bit in chapter 17, he comes back to 18 and he says, "Now don't forget, in those days there was no king in Israel." So what are people doing here? They are doing what is right in their own eyes. That's going to set up the foundation of the theme of this chapter. It's important for us to get that, to be able to take this chapter and make the application that I want us to see here in just a little while. But as we go through the story here, we see what we have just read. The tribe of Dan sends these 5 men so that they can go through the land and explore it to find this place that they are going to dwell. Now, I forgot to mention this in chapter 17, and it is probably significant that we do come to this understanding that as far as the cycle of Judges is concerned in this writing, we've come to the end of that. We're not going to be seeing the raising up of any more judges throughout the remainder of this book. At chapter 17, that has ceased with Samson back in chapter 16. But we come to stories that are bringing out what this book intends for us to see and to be able to take and make application in the remainder of what is presented to us in this book. And so Dan has sent out these 5 men, spy out the land, explore it, find where they are going to dwell. They come to the hill country of Ephraim. They come to Micah's house, and being here, they're dwelling there, they recognize the voice of the Levite. Now, that is an interesting thing to me, and we're not given enough information that we can draw out where they know his voice from or any of that, but they know his voice for whatever reason. They recognize his voice, and so they come to him and they start questioning him. What are you doing here? What's your purpose in being in this area? What's going on with you being here? And so he tells them, I came into this area and I was hired as a priest. He's hired me to stay here and to serve as a priest for him. And so they're seeing this. They ask him, if you are serving as a priest, will you inquire on behalf of God for us? Will you tell us if our going in this journey to seek out this land, if it is going to be a success or not? Now, we have already pointed out from later in this chapter that this man is not qualified to serve as a priest in this way. Certainly, he is qualified to partake in Levitical duties as he is a Levite. But to serve as a priest, he is unqualified. But as he gives his answer, it's really a fascinating thing. They ask him the question, and he gives them an answer. And you say, well, that's kind of how asking a question works. But notice how it is presented to us in the text. They ask him, and what's his immediate answer? Go in peace. The journey on which you go is under the eye of the Lord. What are we missing between verses 5 and 6? If you don't see it, I will tell you what we're missing. We're missing the priest asking the Lord. We're missing him asking God what God has to say about the matter. Here's the answer he gives them. You want to hear it's going to be a success? You want to hear it's going to be a good thing? Let me just go ahead and tell you, it's going to be a good thing. Sometimes I'm guilty of putting in cross-references that in and of themselves, they don't have anything to do with the text. My mind just makes associations with what's going on in another place of Scripture. And this is one such place. When I think of David coming to Nathan and he tells him, I live in this really nice house, and there God is just living in a tent. I want to make a house for God. And you remember what David's told? Nathan says, go, do what's in your heart. And do you remember what happened that night? God comes to Nathan and he says, nope. Can't be like that. David's a man of war. He's not going to build my house. His son will build my house, but it's not going to be David. What did Nathan fail to do in that text? He failed to ask God, and God's answer, contrary to what Nathan thought, because I am certain that Nathan thought it was going to be perfectly fine, because here is David, a man of God. Why couldn't he build God's house? And so, go, do what's in your heart, David. But it wasn't for David to do. that wasn't God's will. And so you think about this text, chapter 6. We are going to, in Judges 18, verse 6, we are going to see, there's no doubt, you can't read 18 and not come to this conclusion, the Danites are going to be successful in their mission. They are going to come in, they're going to wipe out, they're going to find land, they are going to dwell where they are. But the priest's answer is very suspect, because whose answer is it? It's the priest's answer. He does not inquire of the Lord. He does not go before God to ask him the answer to the question. He gives the Danites the answer that they want to hear, which is a very, very dangerous thing. But with that, let us continue on. As we come into verse 7. Then the 5 men departed and came to Laish and saw the people who were there, how they lived in security after the manner of the Sidonians, quiet and unsuspecting, lacking nothing that is in the earth, and possessing wealth, and how they were far from the Sidonians and had no dealings with anyone. Let me point out very quickly before we continue on in the reading, where the ESV reads that they are lacking nothing. I have a footnote that lets us know that the meaning of this Hebrew term is actually uncertain. The scholars haven't determined one for one what this phrasing means quite literally. And so your translation, I recognize, does read a little bit differently. But what I hope you can see in the presentation of what we do know the text says, even though there's some terminology in there that we can't quite translate with certainty, that they come in and they see a land that's really good. And they see a peoples who they're going to be able to take the land from. And so that's really the concept at play here, that they're not missing out on anything. They have all that they need here in this land, and they're going to be able to come in and take it from the peoples who are dwelling there. But with that, then, let's continue on, verse 8. And when they came to their brothers at Zorah and Eshtaol, their brothers said to them, "What do you report?" They said, "Arise and let us go up against them, for we have seen the land, and behold, it is very good. And will you do nothing? Do not be slow to go to enter in and possess the land. As soon as you go, you will come to an unsuspecting people. The land is spacious, for God has given it into your hands, a place where there is no lack of anything that is in the earth." And so making this recognition as they come back and they tell their fellows, it's good land. The people are unsuspecting, and so we are going to go and we will take the land from them. Which brings us then to verse 11. 5 men were sent out to spy the land, but then verse 11. So 600 men of the tribe of Dan, armed with weapons of war, set out from Zorah and Eshtaol, and went up and encamped at Kiriath Jearim in Judah. On this account, that place is called Mahanadan to this day. Behold, it is west of Kiriath Jearim. And they passed on from there to the hill country of Ephraim, and came to the house of Micah. Then the 5 men who had gone to scout out the country of Laish said to their brothers, "Do you know that in these houses there are an ephod, household gods, a carved image, and a metal image? Now therefore consider what you will do." And so coming to this part of the text, the 5 men come back and they say, "It's good stuff. We need to get men sent out." So 600 able-bodied men, 600 armed men get ready to go so that this city, so that this land might be taken for them. And they come to the hill country of Ephraim. They come to Micah's house, and the 5 men say, "You know what's here? Some pretty rich stuff here. You know, you think about all of the silver that was put into the making of these images. You think about how much more silver would have went into the making of the household gods. You think about all of the rich resources that would have went into the making of the ephod." It says, Think about this, guys. There are 600 of you. Do you realize how much stuff is here? Now, don't think too fast. Take your time thinking. Let's figure out what we're going to do here. You see the very strong implication of their words as they're telling you, don't move on too fast here. We need to get in and we need to take these things. We need to make them ours. Verse 15. And they turned aside there and came to the house of the young Levite at the home of Micah and asked him about his welfare. I want to pause there for just a moment. I don't have a whole lot to comment on it. I didn't even include anything on the screen about that. But as they asked this Levite about his welfare, and they've just talked about everything that is within Micah's house, do you think maybe they're fishing around for perhaps how rich Micah may or may not be? How well does he take care of you, priest? What does he give you? What's going on in your life that he has provided you with? But continuing on, verse 16. Now the 600 men of the Danites, armored with their weapons of war, stood by the entrance of the gate. And the 5 men who had gone to scout out the land went up and entered and took the carved image, the ephod, the household gods, and the metal image, while the priest stood by the entrance of the gate with the 600 men armed with weapons of war. And when these went into Micah's house and took the carved image, the ephod, and the household gods and the metal image, the priest said to them, "What are you doing?" And they said to him, "Keep quiet, put your hand on your mouth and come with us and be to us a father and a priest. Is it better for you to be priest to the house of one man or to be priest to a tribe and clan in Israel?" And the priest's heart was glad. He took the ephod and the household gods and the carved image and went along with the people. I went a little beyond our reading that I have on the screen here, but those 5 men, they go into the house and they take those things. And where are the 600 armed men? Not too far away. They're at the entrance of the gate. They are letting it be known. Do you see how powerful our army is? Do you see the strength of our might? 5 men are going in and taking this, but don't think it's just the 5 men. Do you see the power that they have behind them? And you notice that the Levite, serving as priest, is standing among the 600. Let's go ahead and just finish it up with verse 21, carrying it through the next section. So they turned and departed, putting the little ones and the livestock and the goods in front of them. And so they come out, having taken these things, and the priest says, "What are you guys doing?" And they tell him, "You keep quiet. Don't you worry about what we are doing. You just go ahead and you put your hand over your mouth. Keep quiet about this matter." In fact, you've been serving as priest to one man. How about to a whole tribe? How about not merely to a singular household? Priest, don't you see bigger and better things on your horizon? Why don't you go ahead and come and serve us as priest? Now, I want you to notice that the language they use as they ask him about being a father and priest to them is remarkably similar to the language that Micah uses as he is talking to this Levite about serving as priest. And I do very much believe that is in the literature. Well, 1, it happens that way because that's the way it is said. But 2, it is meant to call our minds to Micah's word to this priest, where the priest says, "Yes, I will come," or the Levite says, "Yes, I will come and I will serve you as priest." But then, when greater opportunity of the same nature is offered to him, a whole tribe comes and says, "Will you serve us as priests?" He does see bigger and better things on the horizon, because then his heart is glad. And he said, "I am happy to go with you. I'm happy to serve you as priest. And so they take Micah's things and they take the priest with them. They load up all of their things and they move on their way. And then Micah begins to pursue them. Verse 22. When they had gone a distance from the home of Micah, the men who were in the houses near Micah's house were called out, and they overtook the people of Dan, and they shouted to the people of Dan, who turned around and said to Micah, "What is the matter with you that you come to us with such a company?" Can you imagine the gall of the Danites here? They come in. They take this man's things, which indeed would have included many riches, wrong for him to make absolutely, but would have been inclusive of many riches, and they leave with it, and he comes to get his things back, having called all of his neighbors out. They have an army. He needs some people with him as well, and they're looking, "What's the matter with you? You following us with this company?" And so the gall to come in and to be able to take these things that they do and to act in such a way, and we're going to see the reason they act in this way, that they feel so confident to behave in this manner and treat him, ask him what is wrong with him. Continuing on, verse 24. And he said, "You take my gods that I made in the priest and go away, and what have I left? How then do you ask me, what is the matter with you?" And so looking at, and it's what I was looking to just a moment ago, he's saying, "What's the matter with me? What's the matter with you? You come in and you take my stuff and you don't expect me to follow after you? What do you mean by asking me, what's the matter with you?" I would put the same question to you, but look at their answer. And the people of Dan said to him, "Do not let your voice be heard among us, lest angry fellows fall upon you, and you lose your life with the lives of your household." Then the people of Dan went their way. Do you see what they see here? They see, "I have 600 armed men. What are you going to do about it, Micah? You're going to come and take it back? I don't think so. Micah, how about you go ahead and keep your mouth shut? We do not want to hear your voice among us anymore. And if we do, guess what's going to happen? You and your household are going to die. Angry fellows." It's funny how they kind of step into the third person there. I don't know who, but someone among us is going to get angry enough to kill you if we hear your voice among us again. And we see that Micah doesn't do anything, and they go on their way. Why doesn't Micah do anything? We stop partway through verse 26. And when Micah saw that they were too strong for him, he turned and went back to his home. He saw what they saw. They saw they were more powerful, and they got to go in their way. He saw they were more powerful, and he lets them go on their way, and he goes back to his home. And then as we finish up the story, we do see the Danites coming to the city that had been spied out before, verse 27. But the people of Dan took what Micah had made, and the priest who belonged to him, and they came to Laish, to a people quiet and unsuspecting, and struck them with the edge of the sword, and burned the city with fire. And there was no deliverer, because it was far from Sidon, and they had no dealings with anyone. It was in the valley that belongs to Beth Rahab. Then they rebuilt the city and lived in it. And they named the city Dan after the name of Dan, their ancestor, who was born to Israel. But the name of the city was Laish at first. And the people of Dan set up the carved image for themselves, And Jonathan, the son of Gershom, son of Moses, and his sons were priests to the tribe of the Danites until the day of the captivity of the land. So they set up Micah's carved images that he made as long as the house of God was at Shiloh. And so the Danites take Micah's good, and the priests, they come to Laish, and they do overthrow the city. They burn it down, and they rebuild it, and they rename the city. It is no longer Laish. They name it after their ancestor, Dan. They name it after their tribe. They set up these images, and this Levite that we have been examining, his identity is revealed in the ESV. Jonathan, the son of Gershom, son of Moses, and then he and his sons, we're told, serve as priests until in the tribe of Dan until the captivity of the land. I did take the time to point out and say in the ESV this time, to be frank and honest. Last week, as we looked at this verse, I did not realize that we had a manuscript difference where your translation, those of you who do not use the ESV, probably says son of Manasseh. And in the looking at this word, it does appear that Moses is the appropriate reading, particularly coming from Gershom into Moses. Moses seems to be the right reading. I've shared with you, I know very, very, very little, and I cannot emphasize those varies enough, about Hebrew. But for those who do know more Hebrew than I do, they have commented on in the writing of this word that a floating Hebrew letter, I believe is noon, is placed above this word to change its meaning from Moshe, Moses, into Manasseh. And it does appear from all scholarship that this is supposed to say Moses, going back from Jonathan to Gershom, who was the son of Moses. This is one of those points that I allude to in the beginning. Regardless of which way this stands, it's not going to affect the true meaning of this passage that I want us to be able to take and make application from this book as a whole and from this chapter as we work with that. But I do want you to know that that's why we have that distinction. There is this manuscript difference, and that is what is happening with that word there. And as best, once more, scholarship can tell, that should be Moses. But let's just say I'm wrong. Let's say scholarship is wrong about that. It's supposed to be Manasseh. Well, let's allow the point that we have made from this verse. Either way it stands, this man is not qualified to be priest because of his lineage, whether it go back to Moses. Yes, he serves as a Levite, but he does not follow after Aaron, Moses' brother, and so he is unqualified to be priest. But even going back to Manasseh, he is unqualified to be priest, though he is a Levite. But with that, as we've come through this story in its entirety, I want to take and make a couple of interwoven applications. And in part, I am, I suppose, disappointed in myself that it took me this far into the book of Judges to finally be able to see this application made clear. Several commentators have made this application in the beginning of the book, and it was just, I don't see it. I don't see it. You're not really applying that correctly. And finally, I get here. Oh, this is the point they've been making the whole time. And I'm the one who's been stubborn-headed this whole time because they've been absolutely right. You remember I said to you, it's very important to the application of this chapter that we recognize when it's said, in those days, there was no king in Israel. He's recalling the concept that everyone did what was right in their own eyes. That here, there was no one to lead them in righteousness. And so if something seemed right to a person, they did that thing. Something else seems right to another person, they did that thing. There was no king to lead them in righteousness, and so they did what was right in their own eyes. And in this, I want us to see we need a king who leads us in righteousness. Now, the point that I have seen throughout this book, I've pointed it out a number of times as we look through the Judges, that as you see a judge lead Israel in righteousness, what does Israel do? They follow in righteousness. As there is a righteous judge, Israel walks righteously. And then, so often in the cycle, what do we see happen? The judge dies, and what does Israel do? Israel did what was evil in the eyes of the Lord. And the point that I made out of that a number of times is that they failed to take the righteousness. They failed to take the faith of that judge who led them righteously and make it their own so that they continued walking in the Lord's way. And that point is, I think, well made. Otherwise, I would not have made the point. But here's what I think we need to see in the repetitive nature of this. We need someone who will lead us in righteousness. We do. Because that is when Israel was walking in righteousness, when they had someone to lead them in righteousness. Now, Israel's mistake was conferring that upon a man of this world, one who would die, one who would leave them, one who, when he is gone, his leadership is gone. And when his leadership is gone, what does Israel default back to? Doing what is right in their own eyes instead of following in righteousness. You know what you and I need? We need a king. We need one who would lead us in righteousness, who does not have the failings of man, to die and have death hold him so that his leadership has now departed from us. And that's exactly what our God has given us. A king to lead us in righteousness, whose leadership cannot be taken away from us. Who is Jesus? Revelation 19 and verse 16. Lord of lords and King of kings. And what does he lead us in? He leads us in righteousness. Look with me in 1 John chapter 3 and verse 7. 1 John chapter 3 and verse 7, where we see this point being made, how we will live looking at him. Little children, let no one deceive you. Whoever practices righteousness is righteous, as he is righteous. What are we doing? We are practicing righteousness as he is righteous. What are we doing? We're aiming to be like him. Look back in verse 3. And everyone who thus hopes in him purifies himself as he is pure. Where is this king leading us? He leads us in righteousness. Leadership that death cannot take away. You put that leadership upon a man. A good man, we might even say. One who lives faithfully, one who lives righteously, and I'll tell you what, even living faithfully and righteously, one who will someday live again as God raises him up from the dead. But when he is gone from us, what's gone with him? His leadership. Now, we need to do the applications that I have made before. The faith and the righteousness that leader displayed, we need to make that our own. Because if it isn't our own, then when he leaves, that faith is going to leave. But two, we need to not put that in any man. Because when he is gone, That which he brought is eventually going to fade away. I know we can talk about legacy. I know we can talk about lasting impact. I understand all of that. But what he brought as he lived in this world eventually leaves this world. You know who hasn't died? Better yet, that was a terrible way to word that, because he has died. Do you know who's living? Do you know whose leadership stands? Do you know whose leadership cannot be taken away? And do you know where he's leading us and how he's leading us? He's leading us in righteousness, and we need this King that we might follow him, because that cannot be taken away from us. And I think we have seen this lesson presented to us a number of times throughout this book. I missed it so many times. And finally in this story, I begin to see it. As you look at Israel's actions, there was no king, and they did what was right in their own eyes. We need a king so that we do not do what is right in our own eyes, but what is right and what the king says is righteous. Leading us to making this interlocking point, our final point this evening, that under this king, it's not our power that matters. It is his power. What happens if everyone is doing what is right in their own eyes? We've made the point a number of times in recognition. There aren't too many people who act in a way that they say, you know what, I'm going to do something just absolutely terrible for the sake of doing something absolutely terrible. I feel like being evil today. Are there people like that? Sure. But most people who are making decisions, they're making decisions that say, this is right. This is good. This is the right decision to make. And there's someone on the other side of that decision that's saying, that is absolutely the worst decision you could ever make. You are an idiot, and I can't believe that you would ever think that way. My way is right. How I think about this issue is the right way. Now, in this situation, let's ask the question, who's going to come out on top? Who's going to be victorious in this situation? It's not the one that's right, whether one of them is right or neither of them is right. It's not the one who's right. It's the more powerful one, isn't it? The one who has the strength to enforce their decision. Who came out on top between Micah and Dan? It wasn't Micah. He did not have the forces that he needed. Dan comes in with 600 armed men, and they say, we're taking your stuff, Micah, and there's nothing that you can do about it. Right or wrong, so we're more powerful. And guess what? This is right in our eyes. You might not think so. Sorry, bud. It's right in our eyes, and we have the power to take it. And that's what happens. When we're living life, doing what is right in our own eyes, not being under a king who leads us in righteousness, that's how we live. The more powerful who is doing what is right in his or her own eyes, that's the one who gets what they want. But what happens when we place ourselves under a king who leads us in righteousness? All of a sudden, it's not my power that makes that decision. All of a sudden, between you and I, it's not the more powerful who gets their way. It is the one who wields true power that gets his way when we submit ourselves to him. Let's see a couple of applications of that. One, as we think about dealing in ourselves, but two, as we think about battling our enemy. Let's look in Colossians chapter 3 and verse 15. Colossians 3 and verse 15, as we look at what is to rule over us. and let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts, to which indeed you were called in one body, and be thankful. How do we deal with one another? I come in and I say, I'm right, and so I'm going to do what I want to do here, and I just take your things, metaphorically speaking, and I go about my way because my army's bigger? Or do I say, there's a king over me, and there's a king over you, and we're going to let his peace umpire us. We're going to let his peace rule and make decision between you and I. It's not about my power. It's not about your power. It's about his power. When we submit ourselves to the King who leads us in righteousness, this is the end result. But if we all do what's right in our own eyes, we're all going to be doing different things. Whoever is more powerful in the end is just going to walk right over those who are beneath them. But let's also see that as we think about dealing with our enemy, looking at and closing out with Ephesians 6 and verses 10 and 11. Finally, be strong in the Lord and in the strength of his might. Put on the whole armor of God, that you may be able to stand against the schemes of the devil. This is a very powerful point for us to see and recognize here. Do you know what happens if you go into this battle drawing upon your power? Do you know what happens if I go into this battle saying, I'm strong enough and I'm just going to steamroll? That's the word I was looking for a moment ago. I'm just going to steamroll the devil, just like the people of Dan came in and steamrolled Micah. And you get into that battle, you're going to be sorely disappointed as the devil goes running right over you, as the lion comes in and shakes you by the neck, killing you, because he is stronger than us. He will absolutely destroy us. And in our weakness and pride, we'll go out thinking to be so victorious, and we do nothing but lose. But under this King, when we submit ourselves to him as he rules over us, it's not my power that matters. It's not my weakness that matters, because in my weakness, God's strength is seen. And as I stand in the strength of his might, do you know what I can do? Verse 11. I can stand against my enemy, the devil. When I have a king who leads me in righteousness and I follow in his footsteps, that's going to make determinations about the relationship that you and I have, and it's going to make determinations about our victory in battle. And that's what we need. We need this king, and we need to submit ourselves to him so that we can be the people that our God has called us to be. And so with that, we will bring things to a close this evening in asking the question, are you submitting yourself to this king? Are you living your life in a way that purifies itself even as Jesus Christ is pure? Are you pursuing righteousness because he is righteous and making a practice of that? If not, why aren't you? Don't you see what our God has given to us in giving us this king? If you'll make that recognition and you're not living as you ought to live, repent. Turn away from the way of this world. Go to our God in prayer for forgiveness and follow him. If there is anything at all that we can do to help you with that this evening, won't you come while we stand and sing the song selected?